Hello friends, welcome to CEC live lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk on party and party systems in India. This is the fourth lecture where we are talking on party and party system in India. Friends, specifically we are going to talk on the debates and issues on party and the party system in India, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Dr. Satish Kumar Jha is Associate Professor in Department of Political Science, Aryabhatta College, University of Delhi. Let's welcome our guest Dr. Satish Kumar Jha, and let's try to have deep insight into today's session as well as the topic too, as this is the concluding session on party and party systems in India. So we believe that you are going to get more and more knowledge on the topic from Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Now I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Satish Kumar Jha once again. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Geetika ji, and good afternoon. In fact, today's lecture is the concluding part of 4-part series on party and party system in India. In fact, we started our discussion with the discussion of party system in India, the debate whether India has a system or only configuration of parties, political parties. And then we discussed the different phases through which the parties have evolved in India, and I divided my discussion into 6 different phases through which one could understand party system in India. Then we also had discussion about national parties and the regional parties, particularly the regional parties, this phenomenon which is considered to be very important development in India. The regional parties have existed for quite some time. Even in colonial period there were parties who were regional in nature and origin. But after 89, particularly after the advent of coalition politics and minority government, we discussed that how regional parties have been calling the shots and how their importance has increased manifold. So this is something which we dwelt on. We basically dealt with in details in our earlier part of our lecture. Now, what today I intend to do is to discuss some of the issues which confront political parties in India. Of course, in my last lecture I had also alluded to some of the issues, but today it will be more detailed discussion on those issues and those how those issues confront Indian political parties, how there is a dire need of reform of political parties, because political party is the main agency through which democratic form of government, the parliamentary form of government works, and therefore the parties need to be in good shape and good health. So therefore there are a number of proposals which have been mooted by both civil society organizations like Association for Democratic Reforms, ADR, and many such initiatives have been taken by many groups, along with Election Commission, Law Commission, and so many other constitutional bodies have also made proposal for reform of political parties. So in fact this issue is very important, that why first of all there is a need for reform, and secondly, if there is a need for reform, then what direction this reform should take. So these are some of the issues we will be discussing and touching upon in today's discussion. Now at the very outset, I should start this discussion on the debate on Indian political parties or issues confronting Indian political party is the issue of ideology. In fact, parties normally it is believed need to have some sort of ideological orientation or some type of ideological commitment. That ideology could be the ideology in terms of liberal values of democracy, could be in terms of the Marxist-Leninist ideology, could be something else, but nonetheless ideological orientation of parties considered to be important. But today we are living in a different era and different time. There are parties which believe that they are basically post ideology, the parties of post ideology era and post ideology period. This is what we heard when Aam Aadmi Party was born in India in 2014, because they claim, number one, that ideology has lost its all significance and therefore ideology doesn't have any meaning. What is important is the pragmatic policies, the policies which are basically suited for the people, and therefore ideological commitments sometimes become a kind of baggage, and therefore political parties have to set that baggage in order to serve the people better. So, this is something which was started by one political party, of course, a party which emerged out of a movement against that was anti-corruption movement in India, popularly known as Anna movement. But this is not only Aam Aadmi Party which has been talking about post ideology period of politics, not only in India but globally. But in India they say that ideological baggage has to be shed if parties have to serve the people better. So this is something there. But at the same time, this is a general basically understanding among scholars that political parties in India do not have any ideological commitment. In fact, some of the national parties, of course, the regional parties are normally believed to be regional in orientation. They are less concerned with ideology, more concerned with the regional issues, the local issues. But at the same time, we should remember that even regional parties cannot be called purely ideology-less political parties, because they also have some sort of ideology, in the sense that sometimes they have a commitment to linguistic identity of the people, sometimes it is something else. So therefore identity is a very important issue, and therefore if ideology is seen in a slightly broader terms, then one can say that this type of identity politics also acts as an ideology for that political party, as a framework. One can say the roadmap, or one can say that set of ideas, set of values around which they basically function and conduct their activity. But so far national parties are concerned, normally it is believed that from the very beginning Indian politics, of course, was divided into two into two camps, left of the center and the right of the center, and then there was a very big centrist space in Indian politics, and political parties basically revolved around these three spaces: left of the center, right of the center, and the centrist space. Congress occupied that centrist space. Then there were parties on the left side of center, and there were parties on the right side of the center. Of course, there were groups within the Congress, the factions within the Congress, the dissidents within the Congress, who at times acted as a left of the center within Congress party. There were, of course, parties who were clearly left oriented, they were committed to the Marxist Leninist ideology, like Communist Party of India, or some of the socialist groups which trace their background in this Congress Socialist Party, which was formed in 1934. So therefore there was a big space which was the left of the center space. Of course, Rajani Kothari, as I was mentioning earlier in my earlier lecture, when he talked of Congress system, he made this a very important premise of his entire argument, that how Congress included within it both the party of opposition and party of government, because there were factions, there were dissidents within the Congress who were more important than the opposition parties existing outside the Congress party. So therefore this Congress system combined the left of the center consensus within the party, though it occupied a centrist space. So this is how the Congress system was explained, and we have had a detailed discussion in earlier lecture. But one thing is very important, this left-right distinction in Indian politics. If Congress was considered a centrist party and the communist parties were left parties, then there are also parties which were basically occupying the right of the center space. In earlier era, in fact, it was the Swatantra Party of Rajaji, which was considered a rightist party in India, pro-rich, pro-landlord, pro-corporate, pro-market. Later on, Bharatiya Janasangh, in its later incarnation, it has become Bharatiya Janata Party, but Bharatiya Janasangh was also considered a right of the center party. So these were the national parties at the national level in left and right sense. But what has happened that over the years, it is normally seen that left-right distinction has got completely blurred in Indian politics, and largely on account of two factors. One, the economic reforms of 90s, and secondly, this coalition building exercise at the national level, more at the national level. So what has happened that in coalition building, this left-right distinction has simply become immaterial, because the parties who are not who cannot be considered outrightly a right-oriented or right-leaning political party, sometimes join hands with the left-leaning political party. Or one can say that the parties which are left-leaning or at least cannot be considered right leaning, sometimes becomes part of the left led or left included coalition. So therefore this coalition is coalition making and coalition building exercise has blurred this distinction between left and right. In fact, sometimes it is argued that in fact the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, and its ideologues, they argue that 1967, when for the first time non-Congress governments were formed in the state, those coalition governments included both the CPI, Communist Party of India, as well as Bharatiya Janata Sangh. So coalition from the very beginning acts according to its own logic, and therefore that blurs this left-right distinction in coalition formation of coalition government. But what I was mentioning earlier, the economic reforms, that is a very important factor, which or enabling factor, one can say the factor which has blurred this distinction. What has happened that broadly one can say that there is a national consensus among political parties on economic reforms. In fact, two important national parties, Congress and the BJP, one can say that have more or less consensus. There is a bipartisan consensus on economic reforms. Of course, the speed, the direction, moderation, modulation, all these things can differ with the change in the government. But nonetheless, so far as economic reform is concerned, so far as liberalization and other aspects of economic reforms is concerned, structural adjustment as part of this package is concerned, one can find broadly a consensus among these two national parties. Even other political parties may have the regional base in terms of their social constituency, but nonetheless on economic reforms many of them subscribe to this view and this ideology. And therefore what we find that except perhaps the left political parties like Communist Party of India, CPM, and some of the ML groups who sometimes join parliamentary politics, except these left oriented political groups, most of the political parties have today evolved a consensus on economic reforms, and therefore what has happened that this left right distinction has taken a beating because of this type of consensus, because in earlier era we find that the Indian polity was clearly fractured around this ideological line, the left and right, and that's why I mentioned Swatantra Party, Bharatiya Janata Sangh on the one hand, and the Congress and many other left-leaning political parties on the other. So therefore, this is one important aspect. Another aspect on this issue of ideology is that completely one can say that total decline of the class politics in India. That is also at times referred as indicator of the decline of this ideological aspect of political parties. Of course, there were parties who were clearly talking about class issues, and the left parties were in the forefront of it. But along with left political parties, there was also trade union movement, trade union activity. There were peasant movements and peasant related issues and concerns. There was farmers movement, a very vibrant farmers movement, particularly after Green Revolution. And 70s and 80s. In fact, Setkari Sangathan in Maharashtra of Sarad Joshi, Mahendra Singh Tikait's Bharatiya Kisan Union in UP, similar political, similar organizations in Karnataka, Punjab, and many other states. And these organizations were purely taking up class issues. Of course, these organizations never graduated to the level of political party, and therefore they could be considered only as pressure group or one can say interest group. But nonetheless, the kind of concerns and issues they raised at the national level that set the agenda for different political parties. So agenda setting activities of these interest groups and pressure group was very important. What has happened over the years, particularly after economic reforms, that this sort of the class politics has completely declined, and therefore political parties these days are not directly either linked to these class issues or the class politics. They talk about poverty, they talk about poverty eradication, they talk about prosperity for everyone, sabka vikas type slogan, rhetoric, but nonetheless this entire gamut of the class politics, which was a very important characteristic of political parties in India, that has completely declined. over the years. And that's why we find that the peasant movement, farmers movement, trade union movements, these movements these days we hear less of them and more of other concerns, particularly about the concerns of the corporate, so far as the economic development is concerned. That is also a class issue, but class in a different way, the class of affluent and the class of prosperous. So that is one thing. But that does not mean that ideology, one can say that ideology is playing no role in Indian politics, and ideology is playing no role so far as the functioning and working of political parties are concerned. Some of the ideologies which have been there in India from the very beginning are still there. To some extent, one can say that the positioning on those ideology has become more polarized, and therefore particularly the national political parties, like Congress and BJP, and therefore the two important ideologies which have become very important in recent years and have polarized this entire political stage one is nationalism, another is secularism, along with this market state dichotomy. But as I mentioned earlier, that one can say that on economic reforms there is a more or less a bipartisan consensus between the Congress and the BJP. So on market and state there is not much of difference between the two national parties, except the left political parties. I think most of them are basically on the same page so far as the market state distinction is concerned. Of course, minimal state or maximum state, such distinctions we keep hearing. Whether the state has an enabling role or a state has a regulatory role, these minor differences keep surfacing off and on, but nonetheless one can say that there is some sort of consensus. But the issue on issues of nationalism and secularism, the two important ideologies which have always been there a bit in front of political parties in India, the debate is becoming slightly more polarized in recent years, particularly after the ascendancy of Bharatiya Janata Party, because what has happened, that nationalism is now being interpreted in two different ways, and this contestation on this nationalism is also not new. From the very beginning, Bharatiya Janasangh and many such organizations who were affiliated to RSS, Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, and Vishwa Hindu Parishad, they try to interpret nationalism in terms of cultural terms, and they called it cultural nationalism. In fact, their ideology believed in integral humanism of Deen Dayal Upadhyay. They traced their ideas to all together different set of ideologues. On the other hand, the Congress swore by the name of secular nationalism, what they call syncretic nationalism at times. So therefore, this secular nationalism versus cultural nationalism debate has always been there since the colonial period, particularly during the freedom movement. But in recent years, in last 2-3 decades, this distinction or this debate on secular nationalism and cultural nationalism has become more pronounced, has become more polarized, and therefore the two political parties seem to be divided on this issue, unlike on economic issue where I mentioned that there is a bipartisan consensus. So therefore, this entire argument that ideology doesn't play any role, in fact doesn't hold good here, because we find that political parties are divided on this issue of nationalism, whether it is to be seen in secular terms. Secular nationalism is basically the word they use, or it is to be seen in cultural terms. As a cultural nationalism, they use the term to characterize their brand of nationalism. Similarly, secularism, another important ideology which has a constitutional sanction in India, and therefore of course it is to be remembered that secularism does not have one singular form or format through which the societies have been governed or the states have been acting. For example, secularism is normally presented as an ideology which has been devised by different societies, different polities to suit their concerns. And for example, there are different theories through which this religion-state relationship could be handled. A wall of separation thesis is just one. that religion and state or religion and politics would be separated in a manner as if there is a Chinese wall between the two. But then Indian context it is argued that India has its own brand of secularism, and this is how the scholars interpret it. They say it is Sarva Dharma Shambhav, equal respect for all religion, and therefore India neither banishes religion from public sphere nor erect that Chinese wall between religion and politics and religion and state. Rather, gives a space to all religions, equal respect for all religions, equal dignity and the citizenship rights to all religious groups. So this is how the scholars argue that Indian brand of secularism emerges from Constitution of India. But on this issue of secularism also you find that lot of debate between two political parties. In fact, the Bharatiya Janata Party believes that the kind of secularism the Congress practices or has practiced is nothing but minority appeasement, that it is basically giving extra rights, or one can say that it is giving extra protection to certain minority groups and call it minority appeasement. Whereas the Congress believes that the kind of secularism Indian Constitution talks of, in fact minority protection or minority rights are integral to this entire framework through which the Constitution has dealt with the question of secularism, tolerance, and so on and so on, and intergroup relationship in India. So therefore, on secularism like nationalism, we find that again this ideological polarization. On caste class issues, we find mostly the regional parties who are basically divided on this caste class issues, because national parties generally seek to present their entire agenda as a multi-class, multi-caste agenda, or an organization which doesn't whose appeal is not limited to one section but has spread to or basically one can say that it is spread to different caste groups, community groups, ethnic groups, and the class groups. So therefore, this is more true about the regional parties than the national parties. But one thing is very clear, that this polarization on these three ideologies, on nationalism, on secularism, sometimes ask us to think whether Sartori's categorization of polarized pluralism, when he talked of multi-party system, can it be applied to India? Because of course one thing we should remember, that Sartori's characterization of polarized pluralism had both number and ideology. So in terms of ideological polarization on these two issues, one can say that it is very close to Sartori. But so far as number is concerned, in fact this number characteristic, one can say that it does not match fully with Sartori's characterization of polarized pluralism. So this is something about ideology so far as the issues confronting political parties is concerned. But apart from ideology, the issues and the debate on ideology, there are many other issues today which confront political parties in India. And those issues are so important that number of reform proposals have been mooted. And normally it is argued that if political parties are not reformed, if political parties do not do course correction, if do not mend their ways, in fact it will be suicidal for a democracy in India. And therefore number of issues are flagged here so far as political parties and the issues of reforms are concerned. But the one important issue which basically is often raised vis-a-vis political parties in India is the question of internal democracy. It is often argued that democracy within demands democracy without. That if you really want to act as a medium or as a agency for democratization of society and polity, then your own house should be in order. Your own organization should be democratically organized and should be functioning as per democratic norms. And one of the important democratic norm is the internal democracy. That how do you practice internal democracy? And when I say internal democracy, that implies that whether there is a regular organizational election or not. If people, the rank and file of the political party, do they get the opportunity to go up in on the ladder or not? Is there any rotation of offices is available or not? So there are many ways through which this internal democracy could be assessed and could be evaluated. Now, on all these bases, what one finds that in India the political parties are quite sort of expectation. In fact, they are sometimes their track record on this issue of democracy is highly disappointing. In fact, it is a well-known fact that there was no internal election in political parties, in many political parties for many years. It was only after Election Commission took up this issue that political parties will be de-recognized if they do not hold regular organizational elections, that political parties started conducting organizational elections. But at times it is seen that these organizational elections are simply sham because they are only on paper. It is known in advance that who will be elected the president of the political party. Of course, the elections at the local level, regional level, those levels of course sometimes throw new names, new faces. But at the national level, the known, the face and the name are known beforehand. So therefore, it is argued that these elections have become a ritual or a formality. And this entire thing has led to centralization of authority in political parties. Instead of being a decentralized organization, political parties are becoming highly centralized. So far centralization is concerned, only the Marxist-Leninist political parties had a commitment to the centralization as an ideology, because they believed in democratic centralism. But other political parties had altogether different type of commitment. One should remember that till early 60s, Congress party, which was a very dominant political force in India, in fact had regular elections, and therefore one could see regular contests for important positions. At times, in fact, the president of the party was elected against the wishes of the then prime minister. So this distinction between legislative and organizational wing, who will be more important, the legislative wing of the party or the organizational wing of the political party. So this distinction prevailed at that time. But gradually what has happened that this distinction disappeared, and therefore the center of authority became the prime minister, the legislative head of head of the legislative wing of the political party. So therefore gradually this thing spread to different political parties, absence of internal democracy, and it has led to many ramifications and implications for democracy in India. So we have to discuss all these issues along with many other issues of funding, funding and the criminalization of politics, absence of mass support, populism, and so on and so forth, as part of this larger debate on political parties in India.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session on party and party systems in India. Friends, there is a lot more for you in store, so you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that we are talking on debate and issues on party and party system in India, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Dr. Satish Kumar Jha is a renowned professor of political science, and through him we always get in-depth knowledge on various issues and topics. So let's welcome our guest Dr. Satish Kumar Jha and let's carry forward this session. Hello sir, welcome back to the session.
Thank you. It's in the earlier discussion of today's lecture, in fact we were discussing how the absence of internal democracy is adversely affecting the functioning of both the polity as well as political parties. Now what I was discussing earlier, that how this internal democracy has disappeared. When I say internal democracy, I basically mean that regular organizational elections, the mobility of among the leaders and the workers, and then some sort of semblance of democratic rotation of positions and authority. So therefore, this absence of internal democracy is at times highlighted as one of the important maladies which is affecting Indian polity through political parties. Now it is also argued that this absence of internal party democracy in last 3-4 decades has led to over centralization of authority within political parties. All decisions are taken at the highest level, what is referred as high command, and therefore the ordinary worker, the rank and file of the party who works at the grassroots level, they don't have any access to power. In fact, their chances of rising to the high positions are also quite bleak. Because the work at the grassroots level, at the constituency level, in fact the way they can nurse the constituency, nursing of the constituency is no longer an important criteria. What is more important is that how these workers who aspire for higher positions are known to the leaders at the top and how they are connected to them. So therefore, this is at times highlighted as a very important development which has derailed the democratic functioning of political parties. I was referring to Congress, that about Congress party it is argued that when it was founded in 1885, particularly for a purpose to fight the British rule in India, and after it became a mass organization under Gandhi, in fact, and after Nagpur Congress of the Congress 1920, when organization was overhauled with the provision of a working committee and many other things, the membership, by paying 4 annas at that time to become the active member of the political party. What has happened, that Congress has come a long way. Even after independence, it is argued that those heavyweights and the stalwarts of the party, they were still on the scene, and therefore it was very difficult to establish the monopoly of one person so far as the party functioning is concerned. So therefore, Nehru as a prime minister, in fact, often met a challenge from the organizational wing of political party. In fact, it's a famous episode when the Tandon became the president of Congress against the will of the Nehru, against the wishes of the Nehru. So therefore, such things are often cited, that how Congress party's functioning was quite democratic. And therefore, at times we could see in those days that leaders came from the grassroots level and from different regional settings, not necessarily important at the central level. But gradually, particularly after advent of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, it is often argued that organizational elections in fact became very irregular. Even if they were held, they were only held on paper, and therefore the chances of ordinary workers to become or to rise to the higher position in the party declined considerably. So after 69, and therefore, in fact, when I referred to Rajni Kothari's Congress system, and Congress system revisited the piece which he wrote in 1974, when he talked about the decline of Congress system, and when he said that this entire party of consensus which it characterized was no longer there. The kind of power sharing which it ensured through its federal organizational network, that power sharing also disappeared, and therefore he argued that the Congress system collapsed and that space became quite empty and vacant. Now, what has happened that 1969 onwards, when Indira Gandhi became a very powerful leader of the Congress, in fact, what is argued that she took recourse to the populist politics, the populism. And populism here is basically used in this sense that the leader's own charisma became more important than party organization. And the leader wanted to mobilize the people over the shoulder of the party organization. And therefore, establishing a direct connect with the people, creating a direct appeal. And therefore, her entire slogan of Garibi Hatao and bank nationalization and the abolition of privy purses, all these measures which are cited as an instance of left-wing populism of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, essentially was meant to basically fill this gap. The kind of control, kind of organizational network the Congress had in the country, and that network was based on this federal democratic principle, because she was uncomfortable with that type of organizational network, because there were a lot of challenges coming to her. One important challenge which she faced was the challenge which came from the syndicate section of the Congress, and therefore 1969 a split of the Congress was the fallout of this. So therefore, in fact, getting rid of organization was important part of her entire strategy, because unless she got rid of the party organization or at least the hold of party organization on the policy agenda or on the leader, it was difficult for her to deal with her adversaries. So therefore, marginalizing party organization was part of her strategy, and therefore for her populism came handy here to deal with such situation. So she took recourse to the left-wing populism after 1971, and therefore that also signaled the complete derailment of democratic agenda of the Congress party as an organization. Now, even today it is argued that the way Bharatiya Janata Party under a leader, a charismatic leader of his Prime Minister Modi, it is argued that the kind of connect he tries to establish with the people over the shoulder of party organization is reminiscent of what Mrs. Indira Gandhi did in 1969. And of course, it is argued that it was a left-wing populism which she practiced, and Narendra Modi practices the right-wing populism. This is how the scholars look at the functioning of Modi as the leader of Bharatiya Janata Party, where he tries to establish a connect with the people, when he appeals to the people directly through his issues and through by setting a new agenda before them. Irrespective of course, it is a different matter that the party and the government both are on the same page today. Unlike Mrs. Indira Gandhi, when she had to face the organizational dissidents from the party. So therefore, this is one issue that how gradually this virus has spread. In the virus of absence of internal democracy. As I was mentioning earlier, that due to the Election Commission's mandate, now political parties have to conduct regular organizational elections. But these elections at times become quite formality, or one can say that it is just a ritual. Because it is well known in advance that who would become the president, because the president is someone who is already established leader. So it is not an open contest in which every worker can get the opportunity to contest and to aspire to go up on the ladder. So therefore, this is one thing. But another implication of this absence of, or one can say the collapse of democracy in political parties, has been seen in terms of the rise of dynasties in political parties. And of course, normally it is, earlier it was argued that on the Congress party, thrives on dynasty politics. But now this thing has spread to different political parties, both at national and regional level. In the regional level, one can say that regional political parties have more of this dynastic rule than perhaps the national political parties. Every regional party has some sort of dynasty. In fact, one thing is there which is to be remembered, that personality-centered regional parties is quite common in India. And as discussed in my last lecture, when I was discussing regional political parties, that one important characteristic of regional party is the personality-oriented or personality-centered, as well as narrow sectional social base. But along with this personality-oriented parties, in fact, another important distinction of regional political parties, this this dynasty. Most of them practice their dynastic rule. The father, if he is a chief minister, he will be succeeded by his son. If there is succession, has to be from the family. So therefore this dynastic rule has become order of the day. One can say it is a basically undeclared rule so far as functioning of political parties is concerned in India. Kanchan Chandra, a political scientist, recently has written a book, Democratic Dynasty, and she argues that these dynasties are democratically legitimized, and this is the kind of defense which they also argue. They say that we may have inherited power on basis of dynasty, but what happens that ultimately our legitimacy is renewed by the people. Only after people accept us, then we are becoming the leader of party and we are becoming the leader of the government. So therefore this criticism of dynasty is ill-founded, because after all it is democratically rooted, it is democratically legitimized, and it is democratically ordered. This is the defense of the dynasts who basically glorify the dynasty rule in India. So therefore what is happening, that this internal democracy, the absence of internal democracy in spite of election commission's mandate, has led to many ill effects, or one can say that many negative implications or repercussions on Indian polity and democratic aspect of Indian society. Now this is something which reminds one of Mitchell's iron law of oligarchy, when he studied political parties and said all political parties have this iron law, that an oligarchy rules. So therefore it is some sort of a very similar to what this Mitchell's argued in iron law of oligarchy. Now, what has happened, that it is not only the emergence of dynasty, but there are other implications also. In fact, Jaffrelot, a French scholar, in a very interesting work, Silent Revolution, India's Silent Revolution. In fact, Jaffrelot has put forth a very perceptive argument. He has basically tried to analyze the cracks within the Congress social base in North and South India. He said that why Congress party could retain its constituency and its hold on the people in the South, but completely collapsed in the North, like UP, Bihar and many other states. And Jaffrelot's argument is that the Congress, because of absence of this internal democracy, didn't offer open space to many sections of society in terms of caste and communities to have their representational aspirations fulfilled, and therefore it got stunted. So they didn't have any other option but to look for opportunity outside Congress party. And therefore what happened, that North India, they got mobilized initially, and later on when their representational aspirations were not fulfilled, they looked for opportunities and options outside Congress. And therefore what happened, that these regional parties like Samajwadi Party, RJD and many other political parties emerged of other backward classes, because these sections who initially got mobilized after Green Revolution and after politicization through regular elections, they also had representational aspirations. But so far leadership structure is concerned, there was no opening in the North. It was always open only for certain sections of the society, because Congress was the upper caste dominated political party in the North, unlike the South, like Karnataka and other states, where the Congress offered ample spaces, ample openings to other castes also, apart from the upper caste, and therefore the Congress base cracked in the North, but they could retain in the South. So this is Jaffrelot's argument so far as the collapse of Congress in North and South is concerned. But here one can infer from this argument that this could be construed as the result of this absence of internal party democracy. Because if there is internal democracy, then what happens, that there is a free flow of ideas, there is a free movement, or one can say that there is a possibility of mobility for different sections of society through parties and party organizations. They can also aspire to go up on the ladder, but this didn't happen. and therefore this the Congress as a party declined in North, largely on account of this absence of internal democracy. If the parties practice internal democracy, then such things perhaps could be averted. Now the next issue which comes up or which confronts political parties in India is the issue of funding. This is very important issue because two things are important to remember here, because this funding issue has lot to do with the corruption and also has lot to do with criminalization of politics in India. So therefore this funding, because political parties need resources, there is no denying the fact. Without resources, political parties cannot function as political parties so far as the electoral politics is concerned. They have to fight elections, and fighting and contesting election needs resources. Where from the resources will come? In 1969, Mrs. Indira Gandhi banned corporate funding. Of course, there are a lot of interpretations of this action of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. It is argued that this was intentionally done. This was done to basically choke the funding of Swatantra Party and Bharatiya Janasangh and some syndicate, the leaders of the syndicate within the Congress who had, very intimate relationship with the corporate world, and therefore he basically choked this funding. In fact, simply, she made, she formulated a policy through which the funding got totally dried up. Now, what happened? That this had a very, negative, implication for, political parties. Of course, what happened on the one hand, that a party which was ruling or the party which had a government at the center, only that political party got corporate funding. But other political parties were deprived of this, these resources, and therefore what happened that many scholars and many journalists have argued on this issue, that what happened, that on the one hand the regional satraps emerged within Congress who could look after funding, and through them of course a new type of cartel was created, and gradually that led to the criminalization of politics also, because the black money and the criminal nexus developed at the regional level, and gradually that went up, and therefore it affected the functioning of political parties. In fact, of course, the connection, or one can say the relationship between business and politics is not new in India. A very eminent political scientist, Kochanek, wrote a book, Business, relationship on the relationship between business and politics. In fact, Santhanam Committee in 1964 also talked about this, nexus between party and the corporate. But what happened? That this entire, banning of corporate funding in 1969, had a very negative effect. And it was basically again, restarted only in 2003-04 when Vajpayee was the Prime Minister. So what happens, that this funding issue is a very important issue before political parties. The resources, whether there should be made a provision for a state funding, that a state should fund all political parties, is it desirable? But then it is also argued that if a state funding takes place, then the parties will no longer be autonomous from the state control. The distinction between a state and parties would gradually disappear. Now recently, of course, when this Aam Aadmi Party emerged as a new political formation in 2013-14, it attempted a new way to mobilize resources through contributions, online contributions, but that also landed up in a lot of controversies because the fake contribution and so on and so forth. So there is no definitive way through which this issue of funding could be tackled at the moment. There are many proposals, including the new proposal of electoral bond given by the India's finance minister Arun Jaitley in recent time. Similarly, in 2017, amendment was made where it was declared that 2,000 in cash money could be donated to political parties without revealing the identity. But this is also considered not a solution, because 2,000, what happens that political parties normally present all donations in range of 2,000, because then the identity is not to be revealed. So, I mean, this electoral bond proposal is also being criticized by ADR, Association for Democratic Reforms, which has been taking up such issues for quite some time. Even they have moved to Supreme Court and sought many important reliefs from the court so far as their plea for democratization of parties is concerned. So, on this new proposal of electoral bond, they have a lot of reservations. They say that this electoral bond will also lead to many corrupt practices. So, therefore, this funding issue is very important. In fact, one of the political leaders recently said that Elections Commission's very simple initiative of issuing the slips to voters before election has basically eased lot of pressure from political parties. The kind of expenses which were involved in distributing those slips to voters at the polling booth level, that has completely got eased through this this Election Commission's initiative. So, this funding is very important because what happened that without resources, political parties cannot function because they have to contest elections. And one thing we should remember, that the size of constituency in India is so big, unlike England and many other countries, that it involves a lot of resources. Though in spite of Election Commission imposing ceilings on expenditure, but it is a well-known fact that political parties have different ways to basically go beyond that ceiling, and therefore expenses are involved and they spend money. And therefore, it becomes sometimes a competition that who can spend more money. And therefore, the funding, the pattern of funding. In fact, India Today, that magazine once conducted a survey and said that the political parties who get a lot of financial support from different quarters, but there are political parties who do not get any support. And according to India Today's finding, it was the Bahujan Samaj Party who ranked lowest in terms of this financial support from the corporate or from the any quarter, because they have to ultimately rely on other channels. So therefore, what is happening, that this funding problem basically is leading to corrupt practices, corruptions, because there are other different ways, underhand dealings, through black money and many other sources that parties mobilize resources, and once they mobilize the resources, then they have to return the favor. So therefore, this nexus between the corruption and the political parties, or the black money in political party, is largely related to this funding issue, and therefore many proposals have been mooted that unless this issue is tackled soon, in fact this is going to play havoc so far as India's democratic polity is concerned. Then another issue is this renewal of its base, or one can say expanding its social base or expanding its appeal. How political parties can do? Political parties have to do it if they have to survive as a political party, and if they aspire to form a government, if they aspire to win the confidence of the people, then they have to basically expand their base. Now, how it can do? Of course, there are two types of political parties. Parties in India which have emerged through movement, and there are many parties which have emerged through movement. Bahujan Samaj Party, Republican Party, Aam Aadmi Party in recent years, and these parties are the product of the movement. Even the Janata Party was the product of a movement, the JP movement. Of course, they were already established political parties, but they merged under a new name, under the leadership of JP. That was Janata Party. So therefore, this movement party has its own way to expand social base and to mobilize people. But there is another way, parties emerge without this movement. Now, how they can keep renewing its social appeal, how they can expand their social base. And interestingly, what has happened recently, that political parties have taken recourse to survey a market, have hired market agencies to find out the mood of the people, the pulse of the people. And at times it is referred as one of the biggest indicator of the decline of political parties. That if political parties have to hire agencies, the market agencies, to know the mood of the people, the pulse of the people, that shows the disconnect between the party and the people, and the party and the constituency. Why this is happening? Because of two reasons. One, the party is totally cut off from the grassroots basis or grassroots level of of the society, and number two, the leaders are also disconnected with the people, because the constituency is neglected. Constituency is not nursed. The nursing of the constituency is a very important aspect of political parties, but there is total neglect of the this constituency. Now here one thing is also referred at times, that political parties in India are organized on district basis, that every party has an organization at district level, block level, etc., etc. Parties are not organized at constituency level. It is argued that this district level organizational base of the party started during colonial period, because the purpose was to fight the colonial state, and therefore the colonial administration had that structure, the block, the district, and so on and so forth. But now that is not the purpose. The political parties' major project is to fight elections. So why can't they reorganize themselves on constituency level instead of organizing themselves at the district and block level? So this is another issue. Then the issue of full-timers, because there are two types of parties, the mass parties and the cadre parties. Cadre parties are the parties where the people are, workers are fully devoted, the cadres. But then all political parties require workers. Now the question of livelihood, where from they will earn their livelihood. The professionals and the fixers, the two types of categories have emerged. The fixers who basically survive by fixing contacts through their linkages with the authority and the power. Now of course how this balancing can be done is also important for political parties. At times United States of America example is given, that how United States of America, with every presidential election we see a new set of leaders and new set of workers, and the next election you will find that those workers and the leaders also disappear. If leaders continue but the workers disappear, they are highly talented professionals. They come with the leader and go with the worker, but later on we find that you have another set. So this workers full-time issue is also important. Then criminalization of politics. The nexus between criminals and crime and politics is also associated with political parties. ADR has been publishing this report. Election Commission of course has made mandatory that every political party who fields a candidate in election has to give affidavit about its track record. Now Bora committee, which was formed in 1993 on this issue, has given a very elaborate report, but there was no follow-up on issue. Then transparency issue, the RTI, right to information, whether parties should come under RTI or not. In fact, parties are resisting it. Defection is another issue. In spite of this 91st Amendment, making 15% ceiling on the ministry in order to prevent defection, that is also not working much. So all these issues are confronting the political parties today, and therefore a very elaborate proposals have been mooted by Election Commission, Law Commission, some of the civil society organizations. Even under JP movement, Tarkunde committee made many proposals, but still nothing much has happened, and therefore these reforms of political party is the most important issue today in India.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, we are taking your leave with the promise that we are going to meet soon and would be discussing more. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.